Welcome. We're talking about insurance for PTOs, booster clubs, and other parent-teacher groups. Why you need it, what we offer, and some good things to know about how to protect your organization. My name is Jamie Fagan. I'm the president at AIM Insurance. Just a little bit about AIM. We started insuring parent-teacher groups in 1989. Today, we insure over 23,000 organizations nationwide, and it's still all that we do. We really take pride in understanding the ins and outs of running a parent-teacher group and the risks that are involved. So with that, let's get started. So why does your group need insurance? To protect the assets of your organization and the personal assets of its members. So oftentimes your organization will be personally sued and the member will be personally sued. So insurance can step in to defend not only your organization, but a member who is sued personally. Anybody can sue for any reason, and they usually do. We see a lot of frivolous lawsuits. Parent-teacher groups are not immune from liability. This is a common misconception, but there is a lot of liability connected with running your parent-teacher group. Typically, school insurance, I should say, does not cover your parent-teacher group. If you submit a list of the types of activities or things that you need to insure to your school, you will find that the majority of it is probably not covered. Specifically, your organization's funds, the property owned by your organization if you own any fundraising merchandise, things like that. And a lot of your activities will probably not be covered. Most school insurance does not cover bounce houses and some of the more high-risk activities. But as a whole, lots of times there's no coverage. So it's important to know whether you have coverage and if you need it. Insurance will also pay attorney fees to defend you. So in the event of a frivolous lawsuit, maybe your organization was not at fault, but you will still have to defend yourself in the event of a suit. So one excellent benefit of insurance that will step in regardless of whether you have created that liability or not. So what kind of insurance should you consider? We offer 4 basic types of insurance to parent-teacher groups, and we'll talk a little bit more about these as we go forward, but event insurance, otherwise known as general liability. This is, again, for your fundraising events, things like that. Embezzlement insurance, protects your money. Directors and officers liability, and property insurance. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. What does event insurance protect your PTO and booster club from? General liability protects you from lawsuits resulting from bodily injury and property damage. Most often this is going to be your events, but it could be your meetings, it could be other things that occur outside of your events. General liability is kind of an all-encompassing, basic coverage that any business should have. Who needs protection under the general liability? The named insured, which is the name of your organization, your PTO and booster members, the volunteers, and the employees should all have coverage under your general liability policy. We note policy limits and recommend that you have $1 million limit for general liability. That is the lowest limit that we offer, but if you don't buy insurance from AIM, just make sure that you do have at least $1 million in general liability. Most school districts will require this, but it's a good thing to look for. Activities that could cause you liability. So here's a pretty basic list of things that cause liability and things that we normally see losses arise from. So bounce houses, babysitting, the usual carnivals. Meetings are another thing that people don't always think of as causing liability, but we've seen claims where an organization may not have a lot of events, fundraising events, but they are having meetings and someone trips and falls over a speed bump walking into school for a meeting. That is something that you could be held liable for and you would want to have general liability insurance for. We like to remind you throughout this presentation that your school's insurance may not cover that. So always a good reminder. Things that are not covered. Auto, watercraft, workers' compensation is a completely different coverage. General liability is not workers' compensation. Fireworks are excluded, mechanical rides, aircraft, and organized sports. Organized sports, we like to note, is the football team, the basketball team. Those athletes are not covered. If you have an event where there's a faculty against student basketball game, that is a covered type of event. Organized sports just means to exclude organized school teams. The first type of endorsement that we talk about is extended medical payments. So the general liability coverage has a component we call medical payments that is standard $5,000 per occurrence. So every general liability policy includes $5,000 per person medical coverage. This is wonderful because it gives you access to medical payment coverage without there being a suit. So it'll just be easy out-of-pocket expenses if someone is to be injured. One of the good things about this is that it covers not only attendees, but your volunteers as well. So if your volunteer is hurt setting up your event, the medical payments coverage will step in. Why is this coverage important? Extended medical payments offers ability for you to increase that limit. So if you're having more high-risk activities and you think $5,000 might not be enough for an injury that may be sustained, you have the ability to increase it. And one of the most important things about medical payments coverage is that it deters lawsuits. So one of the first things that we see happen is, there's an injury and the family may not have enough money to pay for, let's say, a child's injury. So the first thing they do is they look to the PTA to see if they can collect some type of reimbursement from the PTA. They talk to an attorney, and the first thing they do is sue the parent-teacher organization. So if you're automatically offering this supplement with the medical payments coverage, it will deter a lawsuit. So it's a wonderful component of general liability. How do you determine if you need additional medical payment limits? Every organization is really different, but you should consider how much protection you need based on the type of activities. So again, if you're only having a few board meetings a year, you don't do a lot of fundraising, you probably don't need additional limit there. But if you are having lots of events throughout the year with bounce houses and inflatables and rock climbing walls, you might want to consider increasing your medical payments limit. Our team can always advise you if you want to contact us about what kind of limit you might need. The next type of endorsement we talk about under general liability is media liability. This came about in the last 5 years based on high demand. We're doing more and more social media, website, we're all getting a little more savvy, and there is an increased liability connected with those things. So the types of risks that we see are you're posting photographs without getting a release, you're using trademarks without permission, maybe you have an event where you have Chick-fil-A catered and you don't get permission to use their logo on your flyers or something you post on your website. Misrepresentation of information or making confidential information public. So all of these things, you may think they seem harmless, but you made something that was confidential, public, or you misrepresented something and someone takes an issue with it. The types of social media that are covered are pretty much anything that you can think of. In terms of social media, we list a few here, and then the website for your organization is also another really big source of risk in terms of media liability. The next type of coverage that we talk about is embezzlement, also known as crime or bond insurance. So how does embezzlement insurance protect your group, and why is it important? It protects the cash or the money for your parent-teacher group against embezzlement, robbery, and theft. Who should be covered? There are different types of bond policies. There is a position bond or a blanket bond. And a position bond means that it just covers the position, so just your treasurer or just your president. This can be problematic because lots of people may be touching your money. So if you have a volunteer who's collecting money at the entrance to a carnival and you task that volunteer with depositing the money into the bank account and something happens to that money, you want there to be coverage for that money for anybody who handles it. So the embezzlement insurance that we offer at AIM is blanket, covers anybody who touches your money. It's worth noting that embezzlement has quickly taken a lead in our most frequent claim. It used to be general liability, and we still see very high dollar losses under general liability, but as far as frequency, embezzlement is the number one. We talk about the fraud triangle. This is opportunity, motivation, and rationalization. So the opportunity is it's your treasurer or somebody that has access to the money in your organization. There's motivation. A lot of times, they're behind on electricity bill or some other financial burden, and they rationalize taking the money by saying, well, I'll pay it back. We don't need the money in the account right now, and most often they have intentions of paying it back, and then it just doesn't happen. Months go by and the money doesn't get paid back. So oftentimes it's malicious, but a lot of times it's not, and this is how it happens. So how can you protect your organization from a loss? There's a few ways that we really recommend. So one is having a checking account that requires 2 signatures on each check. And we really recommend this whenever possible. We know it's not always possible, but highly recommended. The other 2 are things that are actually required under our policy. Someone who does not have check signing authority review your bank statements on a monthly basis. This is an excellent practice, and we have organizations who contact us and say, we caught this embezzlement because we started reviewing our monthly bank statements. We also require that you conduct an annual audit of your books by either an audit committee or a qualified accountant. So what's an audit committee? It is 2 or more people organized for the sole purpose of auditing your books. Again, this really helps identify issues, embezzlement, theft, missing money. It's an excellent practice, and again, required under our policy. How much embezzlement coverage do you need? All the groups are different, and you have to determine your own level of coverage, but we recommend the safest practice is to match your limit to your annual revenues. We don't recommend, some organizations will say, well, we only have $5,000 or $10,000 in our bank account at any given time. But what we see is that sometimes embezzlement happens over time. So it's $1,000 here, $2,000 there. And that can really add up even if you don't feel that you keep a lot of money in your account at once. It's annual, and you need to look at it based on annual revenues. The next type of coverage we talk about is directors and officers liability. So why does your organization need directors and officers? It protects you in the case of lawsuits resulting from wrongful acts and inappropriate actions. We talk about the different types of situations that happen under directors and officers liability. Typically, this is a well-meaning officer who's doing what they think is best for the organization. It's usually not malicious or criminal or anything like that. They make a decision that they think is best for the organization, and somebody takes an issue with it. So, inappropriate use of organizational funds, misleading statements, wrongful or negligent acts, discrimination, not following your bylaws, or misrepresentation. I'll give you an example of a type of claim that we have seen under this liability coverage. There was a member meeting. The parent-teacher organization knew that there was a particular member who tended to get unruly. They prepared for it by asking security to be on campus for the meeting. The individual did get out of hand, and they instructed security to please remove them for the safety of all the other members and, so they could get on with the meeting. And then this individual sued the parent-teacher organization for a violation of their civil rights. So, perfect example. That board member probably did the right thing for that meeting and for those members, but they still got sued. And the insurance stepped in to defend them for that claim. Some of the things that D&O, as we call it, does not cover is knowingly wrongful acts, dishonesty, criminal acts, and willful or reckless behavior, which is not normally what we see in terms of losses. It's usually a well-intentioned act. The last type of coverage that we talk about is property insurance. And this is business personal property. So it's not a structure or a building. We understand most parent-teacher organizations don't own real property, but this is property that you own, whether, we'll talk a little bit more about what type, but fundraising merchandise, raffle merchandise that you have in your possession. And it protects it from damage due to an accident, theft, or a natural disaster. And again, we like to remind you that your school's insurance probably doesn't cover that. So whether it's, props that you're storing for an event or your raffle merchandise, the school's insurance is not going to cover it. This is a list of a few types of property that are protected. Again, a lot of organizations will say, well, we don't really own anything, but we find that most organizations do at least have in their possession some type of fundraising merchandise or raffle items or something that they use for their fundraising events. And value can add up. So it is good to inventory the things that you have in your possession over the course of the year to determine whether you need property insurance. So that wraps up the main types of coverage that we offer to parent-teacher groups. We're glad you're here. We really encourage you to reach out to us either through our website or call us. We have an entire team, as I said, dedicated to helping parent-teacher groups protect their organizations. So thank you.